I only meant to repair a broken cargo drone that night. Instead, I found a wounded alien warrior girl bleeding among the rocks, starving, exhausted, and ready to fight anyone who came near her. She tried to kill me the moment she woke up. I gave her food instead. I had no idea that simple act of kindness would start a chain of events that would bring alien warships to my doorstep, and somehow turn that fierce warrior into the woman who would one day become my wife. The cargo drone made a noise that could only be described as deeply offended. Daniel crouched beside it with a wrench in one hand and a cup of lukewarm coffee in the other, staring into the open panel like a doctor examining a patient that had insulted his entire profession. "You know," he muttered, tightening a bolt, "most machines wait at least a few months before they start hating me." The drone responded by releasing a tired mechanical beep. Daniel sighed. Yeah, I hate me too." Above him, the sky of the frontier colony stretched wide and empty, a pale violet fading slowly into darkness as the twin moons climbed higher. Cargo ships occasionally passed overhead like distant metal whales, their engines glowing faintly as they drifted toward the landing platforms far behind the rocky hills. Out here, several kilometers away from the colony lights, things were quieter. Too quiet, according to most people, but Daniel liked it. Machines made sense. Machines had reasons when they broke. People rarely did. He pushed himself to his feet, wiped his hands on a rag that had stopped pretending to be clean weeks ago, and gave the drone a final pat. "There," he said. "If you explode again, that's a personal problem." The drone hummed softly, lifted half a meter off the ground, and floated away with what Daniel chose to interpret as gratitude. He watched it disappear into the dim horizon. Another successful repair. Another thrilling evening in the glamorous life of a frontier mechanic. Daniel stretched his arms, his joints popping in protest. Somewhere back at his small workshop, a vending machine was waiting to deny him dinner again. The thing had been refusing to recognize his credit chip for 3 days now. He suspected it was doing it on purpose. "Machines are organizing," he muttered to himself as he picked up his toolkit. "First the coffee dispensers, then the cargo drones. Next thing you know, the toasters start forming a union." The wind carried a faint metallic smell across the rocky terrain. Daniel frowned slightly. That wasn't normal. He looked toward the distant ridge, where the red stone cliffs cast long shadows under the moonlight. Something glinted there. At first he assumed it was debris from a small cargo drop. That happened sometimes. Navigation errors, careless pilots, the occasional smuggler losing a container during an overly enthusiastic escape. Still, curiosity won. Daniel slung his toolkit over his shoulder and began walking toward the ridge. The colony behind him grew smaller with each step, its lights fading until only the quiet landscape remained. The rocky hills crunched under his boots. He climbed slowly, careful with his footing. The wind whistled through narrow cracks in the stone, making soft, hollow sounds that almost resembled distant voices. "Great," Daniel muttered. "Haunted rocks, just what my evening needed." As he reached the ridge, the glint became clearer. Metal, not cargo metal. Armor. Daniel froze. His brain performed a very quick and extremely unhelpful calculation. Armor meant military. Military meant trouble. Trouble meant paperwork. He hated paperwork. Still, he stepped closer. The figure lay half-hidden between the rocks, motionless. For a moment Daniel wondered if it was a statue. The armor plates reflected the moonlight in faint silver patterns, scratched and cracked from heavy damage. Strange symbols were carved along the surface, glowing faintly like dying embers. Alien design. "Fantastic," Daniel whispered. He crouched carefully. The figure shifted. Daniel nearly fell backward. A hand moved weakly against the ground. Not a statue. Definitely not a statue. The alien woman opened her eyes. They were a deep, glowing blue that locked onto him instantly with sharp awareness. She tried to sit up. Her body refused. Daniel raised both hands immediately. "Okay," he said quickly. Before this becomes violent, I would like to officially state that I was not looking for you." The alien woman stared at him. Her face looked almost human. Soft features, pale skin with a faint silver tone, and long hair spread across the rocks like strands of moonlight. But her ears were long and elegant, rising slightly upward from the sides of her head. Even injured, she looked like someone who had spent her life surviving battlefields. She grabbed the broken hilt of a blade lying beside her. Daniel looked at it, then looked at her, then looked back at the blade. "You know," he said gently, "I'm not an expert, but stabbing the guy who just discovered you while you're bleeding everywhere might not be the best survival strategy." She tried to lift the weapon. Her arm trembled violently. The blade rose maybe 3 centimeters before dropping again. Silence filled the rocky ridge. Daniel slowly reached over and picked up the weapon. "Confiscated," he said. The alien woman's eyes narrowed. She tried to speak. The words that came out were sharp, unfamiliar, and clearly angry. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Right, that makes sense." She glared at him. Daniel sat down on a nearby rock. "Well," he continued, "I'm going to assume that was something along the lines of human male prepare to die, which is fair. I get that a lot." Her expression didn't change. Then her stomach growled. Loudly, Daniel blinked. The alien warrior closed her eyes briefly, clearly wishing the ground would swallow her. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small protein ration bar. He held it up. She stared at it suspiciously. "It's food," Daniel explained. Technically, no reaction. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "See," he said, "not poison, just deeply disappointing." The alien warrior watched him for another long moment. Then slowly she reached out. Her hand shook as she took the ration bar. She hesitated, then took a bite. Daniel leaned back slightly. "Well," he said, "congratulations. This is officially the strangest dinner I've ever shared with someone who tried to stab me." She continued eating, fast, too fast. Daniel raised a finger. "Easy there. If you choke, I am absolutely not qualified to perform alien emergency medicine." She ignored him completely. Within seconds the ration bar was gone. She looked at him again. Daniel sighed. "Yeah," he said, "that's the face of someone who needs more food." He reached into his bag and produced another one. Her pride clearly fought with her hunger for about half a second. Hunger won. As she ate, Daniel studied the cracked armor, the burn marks, the dried blood. Whoever she was, she had survived something violent. "All right," Daniel said after a moment. "Let's establish a few things." She looked up at him cautiously. "My name is Daniel. I fix broken machines. I do not participate in interstellar wars, political conspiracies, or mysterious alien invasions." He pointed at her armor. "You clearly participate in at least 2 of those." She swallowed the last bite. Her voice came out weak but firm. "Kaelira." Daniel blinked. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm going to need you to repeat that several times before I stop pronouncing it like a brand of kitchen appliances." She frowned slightly. Then, despite everything, a faint sound escaped her. A small laugh. Daniel smiled. "Well," he said, standing up and offering a hand. "Kaelira, the terrifying warrior who lost a fight with gravity and hunger. How do you feel about medical attention that mostly involves duct tape and optimism?" She stared at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. Slowly, carefully, she took it. Kaelira woke to the smell of burned metal and something that strongly resembled soup, but had clearly lost an argument with gravity. For several seconds she did not move. Warriors survived by waking slowly. Her eyes opened just enough to examine the unfamiliar ceiling above her. The structure looked improvised. Metal panels from different machines patched together with bolts that were either brilliant engineering or reckless optimism. She decided she would determine which later. Her body hurt. That part was familiar. Battlefields always left behind pain that settled deep in the bones like unwelcome guests. But the pain she felt now was dull, wrapped carefully in something tight around her torso. Bandages. A lot of them. Kaelira turned her head slightly. The room was small, cluttered with tools, cables, machine parts, and at least 3 devices that hummed quietly in the corner like nervous animals. A mechanical arm mounted on the wall twitched suddenly and dropped a metal spoon into a container with a loud clank. Kaelira immediately reached for the weapon that should have been at her side. Her hand found only empty air. "Ah," a voice said nearby. "You're awake." Daniel stood across the room holding a steaming pot with obvious caution, as if the liquid inside had already attempted betrayal once before. Kaelira tried to sit up. Her body protested violently. She collapsed back against the narrow bed. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, that was about the level of success I expected." She stared at him. The human looked exactly the same as the night before, tired eyes, messy hair, grease stains on his sleeves, and the calm expression of someone who had accepted that life frequently made poor decisions. "You are still here," she said slowly. Daniel tilted his head. "Well, yeah, this is my house." She frowned slightly. "You did not imprison me." Daniel nearly dropped the pot. "Imprison you? What am I supposed to do, build a dungeon in my garage?" He set the pot down carefully on a nearby table. "Also," he added, "you're currently about as threatening as a sleepy kitten." Kaelira narrowed her eyes. Daniel raised both hands. "Okay, maybe an angry kitten with knives." Her gaze moved around the room again, machines everywhere, half-built devices, broken drones, power cells, welding tools. It looked less like a home and more like a battlefield where machines had fought and lost. Daniel followed her gaze. "Welcome to my workshop," he said proudly, "where technology comes to be judged and occasionally repaired." She studied him carefully. "You saved me." Daniel scratched the back of his head. "I found you bleeding on a rock and gave you food. That's not exactly heroic." "In my world," Kaelira said quietly, "a stranger does not help a fallen warrior." Daniel leaned against the wall. "Well, in my world, leaving someone to die because they have weird ears is generally considered rude." She lifted a hand and touched one of her long ears instinctively. Daniel noticed immediately. "For the record," he added, "I think they're impressive, very aerodynamic." She looked confused. Daniel shrugged. "I assume they help with alien balance or something." Kaelira blinked slowly. "Balance? I don't know," Daniel said. "Humans barely understand our own knees." He grabbed 2 metal bowls and began pouring soup into them. Kaelira watched cautiously. The smell reached her again. It was not entirely unpleasant. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel looked into the pot. "Technically soup." "Technically? Well," he admitted, "it started as vegetable stew, but then the heating unit malfunctioned and things escalated." Kaelira stared at the steaming bowl he handed her. Her warrior instincts screamed several warnings. Foreign food, unknown ingredients, prepared by a man who repaired machines using duct tape. Daniel sat across from her and took a large spoonful. He chewed, swallowed. "Still alive," he announced. Kaelira slowly lifted the bowl. She tasted the soup. Her expression did not change. Daniel leaned forward nervously. "Be honest." She considered the flavor. "It is confusing." Daniel sighed with relief. "Good. That means I didn't poison you." They ate quietly for a moment. Kaelira noticed something strange. The human did not stare at her like a curiosity. He simply ate his soup and occasionally checked a small screen device beside him that displayed blinking mechanical diagnostics. "You are not afraid," she said. Daniel shrugged. "You tried to stab me with a broken sword while you were starving and barely conscious. That should make you cautious." "Oh, I am cautious," Daniel said. "That's why I took the sword." Kaelira frowned. "My blade." Daniel pointed to a workbench. The weapon lay there in several pieces surrounded by small tools. "I'm fixing it," he explained. Her eyes widened slightly. "You repair weapons." "I repair everything," Daniel said, "except vending machines. Those things are pure evil." Kaelira studied the dismantled blade. The weapon was made of alloy technology far beyond most human frontier colonies. Yet Daniel had already disassembled it, carefully, precisely. "How do you understand its design?" she asked. Daniel shrugged again. Metal is metal. He walked over and picked up one of the blade fragments. See this fracture line? Impact damage, probably from hitting something extremely solid. Kaelira remembered the battle, the enemy exo-soldier, the explosion. She nodded slowly. Daniel continued examining the piece. Your armor's the same story, he said. I patched the worst sections, but you're going to have some impressive scars. She looked down at her torso. Warriors do not fear scars. Good, Daniel replied, because that bandage job is ambitious. Kaelira allowed herself a faint smile. Then something outside the workshop hummed. Both of them looked toward the door. Daniel walked to the window. A small drone floated near the building. It scanned the structure briefly before flying away. Kaelira's expression hardened instantly. That is not one of yours. Daniel rubbed his chin. Nope, mine usually beep before invading my personal space. She pushed herself up slightly despite the pain. They are searching. Daniel turned toward her. For you? Yes. He stared at the door for a moment, then sighed. I was really hoping this week would stay boring. Kaelira swung her legs slowly off the bed. Daniel pointed immediately. No. I must prepare. You must sit down. She tried standing. Her legs betrayed her instantly. Daniel caught her before she hit the floor. See, he said, angry kitten. Kaelira glared up at him. He helped her sit again. Relax, Daniel said. If someone comes looking for trouble, I'll handle it. You are not a warrior. No, Daniel said. I'm worse. She raised an eyebrow. I'm a mechanic. Daniel walked back to his workbench and picked up a small remote device. Outside, somewhere beyond the workshop walls, several heavy metallic clicks echoed through the rocky terrain. Kaelira listened carefully. What was that? Daniel smiled slightly. Oh, he said casually, just the defensive mining drones I converted into automated turret systems. Kaelira stared at him. You did what? Daniel returned to repairing her blade. Welcome to the frontier, he said, where even the repair guy prepares for bad neighbors. The first explosion happened just after sunrise. Daniel was halfway through fixing the coffee machine when the entire workshop shook hard enough to knock a screwdriver off the table. He looked at the machine. You see, he said, this is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior I'm talking about. Outside, a second blast echoed across the rocky hills. Kaelira was already on her feet. The warrior armor Daniel had patched together covered her again, though now several plates carried visible weld marks in sections that looked suspiciously like parts from mining equipment. She moved carefully but confidently. Much stronger than the first night. Daniel glanced at her and nodded. Good news, he said. That was not good news. Good news for the story, Daniel corrected. Bad news for our property value. Kaelira walked to the doorway and looked toward the distant ridge. 3 black ships hovered low over the landscape. Angular, military, cold, her expression hardened. They found me. Daniel joined her at the doorway and squinted at the sky. Well, he sighed, that seems rude. One of the ships lowered toward the hills, scanning the terrain with a pale blue beam. Kaelira reached for her blade. Daniel handed it to her. She tested the balance. Perfect. She looked at him. You repaired it. Daniel shrugged. Metal is metal. She studied his face carefully. You should leave. Daniel blinked. Leave? This fight is mine. Daniel pointed at the approaching ships. They are literally flying over my house. They want me. Great, Daniel said. Then they can politely take a number and wait in line. Another explosion erupted in the distance. Daniel sighed and pressed the small remote device in his hand. Across the rocky hills, several hidden machines unfolded from beneath camouflage covers. Mining drones. Except now each one carried a mounted plasma cutter that had been very creatively repurposed. The drones rose slowly into the air like a swarm of irritated metal insects. Kaelira stared at them. You weaponized construction equipment. Daniel shrugged again. Budget defense program. One of the enemy ships suddenly fired. A beam struck the ground 50 meters away, sending stone and dust into the air. Daniel stepped back into the workshop. Okay, he said calmly. Now I'm annoyed. Kaelira moved beside him. "You are staying." Daniel grabbed a small rifle from the wall. "I fix broken things," he said, "and those ships look extremely broken." Another ship descended lower. A group of armored figures dropped from its underside and landed across the ridge. Enemy soldiers, tall, heavily armored. Kaelira's eyes narrowed. "I know them." Daniel checked the rifle battery. "I was hoping you'd say that. They are from the Kareth Dominion." Daniel paused. "That sounds like the name of people who don't return borrowed tools." "They will not stop," Kaelira said quietly. "Not while I live." Daniel looked at her for a moment. "Good," he said. She blinked. "Why good?" "Because I just fixed your sword," he replied. "It would be a shame if it didn't get used." The first enemy soldier reached the ridge. Daniel pressed another button. A mining drone swooped down and fired a burst of cutting plasma directly into the ground near the soldier's feet. The explosion of molten rock sent the armored figure diving for cover. Daniel nodded proudly. "Version 1, he said. Kaelira stared at him. "You designed these overnight." "Technically," Daniel said, "I redesigned them." The mining function was already there. Blaster fire streaked across the landscape. The drones scattered, weaving through the air while returning fire. Kaelira stepped forward and raised her blade. "I will face them." Daniel pointed toward the side door. "Cool. I'll provide emotional support and heavy artillery." She almost smiled. The battle spread quickly across the rocky terrain. Enemy soldiers advanced with disciplined precision. But Daniel's drones refused to behave like predictable weapons. One of them dropped a crate directly onto a soldier's helmet. Another accidentally fired twice as fast as expected. Daniel winced. "Note to self," he muttered, "reduce enthusiasm setting." Kaelira moved through the battlefield like a storm. Her blade flashed through the air with deadly precision. Even injured, she fought with the skill of someone raised in war. An enemy soldier charged her with a heavy plasma spear. Daniel fired his rifle from the ridge. The shot struck the ground beside the soldier, sending sparks everywhere. The soldier jumped back in surprise. Kaelira used the distraction instantly. Her blade knocked the spear aside and struck the armor joint. The soldier collapsed. She glanced back toward Daniel. He waved awkwardly. "Teamwork." More enemy troops arrived. For a moment the numbers looked overwhelming. Then the ground beneath one squad suddenly erupted as Daniel triggered an old mining charge he had forgotten existed. Dust exploded into the air. Daniel stared at the detonator in his hand. "Oh," he said, "that still worked." Kaelira laughed despite herself. The remaining soldiers hesitated. Their ships shifted position above the battlefield. Then something unexpected happened. A new fleet appeared in the sky. Sleek silver vessels dropped out of orbit like falling stars. Kaelira froze. Daniel looked up. "Well," he said, "either that's your friends or we are extremely outnumbered." The silver ships opened fire. Precise energy beams struck the Kareth vessels with surgical accuracy. Within seconds, the enemy ships were retreating. The surviving soldiers withdrew rapidly. The battlefield fell quiet. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly. "Well," he said, "that escalated and then de-escalated very quickly." One of the silver ships landed gently beyond the ridge. A group of tall warriors stepped out. They looked like Kaelira, long ears, silver armor. Their leader approached her. They spoke in a language Daniel could not understand. After a moment, Kaelira turned back toward him. "They are my people." Daniel nodded. "Good, I was running out of drones." The alien warriors studied Daniel carefully. One of them said something to Kaelira. She answered calmly. The warrior's expression shifted slightly. "Respect." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Are they saying something important?" Kaelira stepped closer